Politics without the soap opera, with unfiltered constitutional conservative truth. The Conservative Review with Daniel Horowitz.
And welcome back, America, to the only independent conservative revolution here at the Conservative Review podcast in Central Maryland at our Northern Command Center. And no, we are not recording yet in Greenland. From all of Trump's distractions, I think this is really one I actually agree with. We need to annex Greenland. See, right now in this country, you and I, as forgotten American taxpayers, we don't want to be regulated. We don't want to be subsidized. We don't ask for anything but the core social compact protections that are due and owed to us. We don't get them. So anyone could just come to our border. Anyone could demand anything. Anyone could gain access in court and sue us for anything they want to do. And there's not a darn thing you and I could do about that. That's what we're basically told. Now, we've spent much of the week focusing a lot on the interior. I'm dealing with endless cases of illegal alien sex offenders, child sex offenders, murders. There was a triple homicide in North Carolina last night. I could write articles exclusively on this. We focused a lot on this week. We're going to get back to that next week, as well as other stuff. But I want to go back to the border itself. There's been a lot going on. There's been questions about President Trump slowly implementing some of the ideas that we have proposed, not the categorical 8 USC 1182F shutdown, which should take place. So we're seeing some results. The numbers are going down. So it's definitely not as bad as it was at the peak, but it's still well beyond catastrophic levels, especially in East Texas, South Texas. And there are also other things going on. We have to remember people are now coming from all 49 countries. Before we bring on our guest, our very first special guest here, and by the way, those of you listening on iTunes, this is why you want to tune into YouTube and see the video. Now you could finally see some of our long-standing guests. You'll see what they look like. So we're going to introduce Todd Bensman in a couple of minutes. I just want to read to you here. You know, this just came out from our friends at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. We only have one branch of government, the Ninth Circuit. So they ruled yesterday, this is Circuit Judge Marsha Berzon, a Clinton appointee, that the Central District of California Judge Dolly G's June 2017 order modifying the terms of the 1997 Flores settlement was correct. Quote, assuring that children eat enough edible food, drink clean water, are housed in hygienic facilities with sanitary bathrooms, have soap and toothpaste, and are not sleep deprived are without doubt essential to the children's safety. So they mandated toothbrushes for everyone, and they also mandated a, quote, youth coordinator to work things out. So, I mean, folks, could you imagine if we had a piece of legislation where Congress would get together and say, anyone who wants to come to our border, we as taxpayers are responsible. And it's not the toothbrushes. It's what it embodies, what it reflects. We pay for the expensive medical care that they come specifically for that when our laws under 1182, Section 212 of the INA, which we talk about so often, we did a whole show 2 days ago on the history of these laws. They are inadmissible. Yet we don't have lawyers as the American sovereign to go and enforce those laws and demand and sue the government for not enforcing them. No, foreign nationals, 7.8 billion people, and as we're going to talk about with Todd, not just from Central America, but anywhere in the world, if anything is going on that they don't like, it's kind of crappy there, they could come here, and there is no ability or desire from our government to enforce 1182, meaning, will they be assimilable? Do they share our values? Will they be security threats? Will they be health risks? Will they be public charges? Almost all of them are public charges. We do not enforce that. Anyway, this judge goes on to say that even though, as we mentioned so often, Section 1225 BA1 of the INA, which says that these people shall be detained, well, really, it doesn't mean that. This is a type of crap we're dealing with, and I've frankly had enough of it. Anyway, before I just blow it up here, I want to introduce our guest. As you well know, we have a phony conservative movement. We have a bunch of Teletubbies, a bunch of thumbsuckers, click-servative grifters that all they want to do is have a talking point. Nobody wants to do the hard policy work or investigative journalism. We don't have journalists anymore on any side. Don't you want to know what's going on at the border? Todd Bensman, we've had him on a couple of times. He's senior national security correspondent at Center for Immigration Studies, terrific organization, one of the few organizations that I actually believe in that's doing good work. This man is very unique. See, he's both an intel guy and a journalist. He worked many years in the early 2000s as investigative journalism covering terrorism for the Hearst Papers, Dallas Morning News. Then he went into Texas Department of Public Safety's Intel Division, did counterterrorism analysis. Now he's back out, both being an analyst for CIS, as well as writing at Federalist, PJ Media, Town Hall, all sorts of places, prolific writer. You're going to want to see his columns. You're going to want to follow him at Bensman Todd on Twitter. You're going to want to go to CIS and follow all of his articles. Counterterrorism, border, special interest aliens, you name it. He just took a trip to Piedras Negras, Mexico, right on the other side of Del Rio County, Texas, where particularly Cubans, Russians, Africans, Middle Easterners, all sorts of people are coming in that the media doesn't want to talk about. And he's got some great pictures we're going to put up on the monitor. With no further ado, we are introducing our very first guest for this revamped video show, but certainly a repeat guest for the original Conservative Conscience show, Todd Bensman. Hey, Todd, thanks for being our guinea pig here on the video show.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for that intro. Good to be.
Well, look, you're the only one who at least has journalistic intrigue. What you're doing, I know you're a conservative like me, but it's not even about conservatism. It's about just plain journalism. Could you describe a little bit what you saw and what you were trying to find there on the Mexican side of Del Rio?
Sure. Well, a couple of months ago, I wrote a piece for CIS at cis.org, Center for Immigration Studies, quoting two on-the-ground credible sources who were describing a massive influx of migrants from what we call special interest countries or extraterritorial migrants from all over the world that were moving through in really unprecedented numbers through the Darien Gap between Colombia and Panama, all on their way to the United States. And I put that out there, really a tremendous number of Africans. All of them had heard about the disarray at our border, and they wanted to get in while the getting's good. And that was the reason why so many were coming through. Now, we've always had traffic through the Darien Gap on the way to the border, but nothing like these numbers. 35,000 was the estimate that I was given. And I knew that eventually these people would start to show up at the border, and that we wouldn't really be, the media wouldn't really be on that dime very well, because they're so preoccupied with Central Americans. So what I wanted to do is give that human flow a chance to kind of start to show up at the border, and then go down and see for myself who they were, how they got there, actually interview some myself. And so that was the reason why I went down this time. I knew that there was an encampment just over the Texas border from Del Rio in a town called Acuña. So I went over, and I had intelligence sources confirm that encampment was there and who was in it. So I went over there and I interviewed. I found a Russian who had come all the way from the province neighboring Japan. I found Cubans. I found Cameroonians. I found Democratic Republic of Congo folks all in this camp as well. So I interviewed them. I haven't written my story yet, but if you stay tuned to CIS next week, I should have it out. But we can talk about it here too, Daniel.
And folks, we're actually going to put up on the monitor here, you could see Todd's iPhone. I mean, this is how dedicated he is and meticulous he is. none of these guys speak English, or a lot of them don't. A lot of them don't speak Spanish, because he was dealing with the special interest aliens from extracontinental areas, in Africa. They spoke French, some of them from Congo. So there he is with, Google Translate trying to get the story from them. And one of the things, Todd, I just noticed is that, man, some of these guys are muscled up. They look like warriors. If I wanted to invade a country, that's the type of army I'd want.
Well, most of the Africans that are coming through seem to be military-aged men, young men coming through single. I wrote a separate piece for CIS, also within the last couple of months, raising the red flag that when they cross our border, they could be the persecutor or the persecutee. More likely they're the persecutee. These folks tend to have a story of persecution that has at least, far more credibility to them than anybody coming from Guatemala.
Yeah.
So, but we really don't know who they are. And I was just advocating that our Homeland Security people need to hold these folks back and really check them out better than they do most other kinds of migrants from Mexico and closer in. So yeah, they're young military age guys. I asked them, were you in a military? Were you in a militia? I would just ask point blank, knowing what the answer would be, but still I have their eyes right there, and I can kind of, I can make gut judgments on whether they're being deceptive. And of course, the answer was always, oh, of course not. We were victims of those people. But we'll have to leave a further investigation of those people to our Department of Homeland Security people once they come in.
So my thing is, I guess I'm kind of an ad hoc public defender of the sovereign American taxpayer that has no voice. And, the first thing I think of before we even get to the fiscal cost, which we'll talk about, is just, again, from a security standpoint, most of them don't look, some of them, they look pretty muscled up. I'm not saying they're bad people, but, they didn't exactly look downtrodden. But here's my problem. And this is why I started out with the Ninth Circus, because that's what it is. Let's be honest here. There's nothing new going on in any of these countries. There's always, in many parts of the world, civil wars or even persecutions. But the reason that you have such large numbers now is because the courts invited them to come in. Now, once they come in, or once they come to the border, with some of them, it's not that it's not terrible in their places. And it's not that they might even be in danger. But then the question is, especially with the homogenous countries, they're kind of the same ilk that are doing it. It's hard to disentangle them. And how do we know? Did you get the impression that these guys are like, man, apple pie America, I want to, like the people from Europe coming in the 1880s, I want to become American? Or is look, it's practical. It's a horrible place. If I could come in and they're going to allow me to come in, I'll come in. But are we really going to benefit as a nation from these people?
Well, look, every migrant is an individual. Some may have a criminal history. Some may be hard workers. Some may be educated. I actually met a Congolese who claimed that he had graduated from college. So, in technology, with some kind of degree related to technology. So, it's just hard to say. But all I ever argue for, Daniel, is for strong vetting, that yes, we owe it to the people that you've described, that when people are coming in from these kind of places, that we really know how to vet them with intelligence, with face-to-face interviews, with dumping their cell phone data, checking them out as much as we possibly can before a credible fear interview is granted or an asylum is granted. Almost all of these people that I met in that encampment in Mexico are going to claim asylum. They're waiting there under a policy that we call metering. And I was somewhat, feeling optimistic about some of the people in this camp, because they would say things like, I could have swam the river. I could have crossed the river. The river was like 200 yards away from this encampment, but I want to do it the right way. And they're willing to wait in this camp until it's their turn to get a face-to-face interview in a court hearing and an NTA from CBP. And some of them have been waiting for 5-6 weeks. One of them have been waiting for 3 months. But
Todd, yeah. So you're just to, I don't mean to cut you off there because I want to move this along. We're running out of time here. When it comes to the extracontinental folks, so you're saying generally, particularly where you went, they're not the ones sneaking in. They're the ones that are saying, look, I am being persecuted. I'm willing to wait. But I'm looking here, and I can't share this data, but you as a former employee of Texas DPS are certainly very familiar with what I'm looking at here on my phone. There's about 50 different countries of origin where they track apprehensions in Texas. It's just the state of Texas because it comes from DPS. It's not nationwide or border wide from Border Patrol. And I'm looking at all sorts of countries here for July, the numbers I see. And, there's close to 100 from Democratic Republic of Congo. 1 week I got here, Cameroon, obviously, Angola, lots of different countries, Sri Lanka. So clearly they are also apprehending those who come over, meaning I think those aren't the meteor. If they're metered, they wouldn't be counted in those numbers. So what do you know about those also trying to cross over from these other countries, and what happens with them once they're apprehended?
Plenty of people from around the world just crossed the border, mainly because they heard that they could just be released quickly because we were in such disarray. So all of the people that are coming in, I would say probably most of them just cross the river and just say, hey, asylum, and there's no bed space. So they get an NTA, a notice to appear rather, and they get waved on through. What's supposed to happen, though, the protocol is that ICE will hold them in detention. There'll be a bond set. There'll be time for ICE intelligence officers to conduct interviews. My fear is, and it's not really a fear, I think that I'm actually hearing this, that they're too busy with the Central Americans. And so these folks are just kind of getting, if they get any kind of vetting at all, I'd be surprised. And they're just making bond and waving through with the rest of them. And that's very problematic.
No, it really is. And it's true of the Central Americans, too. We have no idea who they are. Often we don't have NCIC data, or it takes a long time to get it if they do share it. They say I'm Mickey Mouse, give a Mickey Mouse date of birth. And what I'm hearing from some of our mutual friends in Border Patrol, that they are being released. Senator James Lankford from Oklahoma revealed at a hearing with CBP Commissioner Mark Morgan that, there were several cases of known convicted sex offenders and murderers who already had records that were released openly as a family unit, not as a runner, as a family unit. I dealt with a case from Alabama where a Guatemalan came in with a kid a couple months ago and raped that golden ticket kid. So again, they're like, all right, a guy with a kid, whatever, wave them on. And again, to me, this is a violation of everything in 1182F. You have to check to see if they have it. And if I can't determine it, you're not released. But it's the opposite. It's, we have a truncated deadline, you're released irrespective of this. So that really concerns me. On the one hand, you're right. Some of the extracontinental folks probably have more of a legitimate claim, relatively, than the Central Americans. But on the other hand, dude, if I'm Russia or Cuba, Castro, and I want to get in my espionage, folks, isn't this a great opportunity?
Well, let me just quickly, because I know you've got a timeline here, but I interviewed this Russian, and you can show that picture. I found a Russian in this camp, and I interviewed him. And in my, my professional experience interviewing migrants from my intelligence days, I had red flags going off with this guy. For one thing, he when we really kind of dug in, it turns out that he had some kind of problem with the police in Russia, some kind of issue. He would not give me his full name. He was kind of very vague every time I talked about that, the way his eyes moved, the way his body language was. And I suspect that when he finally gets across in front of some professional intelligence officers, that they're probably going to have some issues with this guy. He probably has a criminal record, or he's fleeing some kind of a crime situation back home. And then the question is, what do? Do you call the Russians, and will they call the Russians, and will the Russians give us any information? And is he an intelligence officer? He could be part of the Russian intelligence apparatus posing as a migrant. And
what I've noticed is that no one wants to talk about the ones we don't see. I mean, this is a guy you saw and found, so you can only imagine the ones we don't see. And we don't see them as a result of Border Patrol having to do all these babysitting mandates. So when the Democrats and phony Republicans and the courts start placing these mandates, they don't realize every time you take them off the line, more of these guys are going to get in. I doubt you saw them in this encampment, but what I've been told is there's a lot of Chinese. And you try working with the Chi-Com government on that, right?
Well, right. I mean, there are a whole host of governments that can do nothing for us. Somalia, Libya, Syria. I mean, when Syrians cross the Texas border, and they do, it's not like we can call the Assad regime and say, hey, give us a criminal history on this guy, right? It's just not going to happen. There are a lot of people who are coming from countries that have no intelligence apparatus. Some of them haven't even had police forces, like Somalia, for 20 or 30 years. So, or jail. So if somebody was committing rape in Somalia, we're not going to know. So the whole thing is just the extra continental migration is a unique problem with our border insecurity that needs to be dealt with in its own unique way. And I'm really just worried that we have just thrown out all the protocols while we're dealing with Hondurans. And it's just too bad. I think somewhere in the next year or two, there's going to be hell to pay over that.
There really is. And I want to talk about some of that, too. People we let in through the front door and give green cards. So you can only imagine the ones we don't vet even a shred. I mean, again, I'm looking here. You got Russia, Sierra Leone, Sri Lanka. We've even had from Pakistan, Kosovo, Bangladesh. There's really been a steady trickle. Not just ones and twos, but you're seeing, just looking at the apprehensions, about 15, 20 a week we're apprehending. Have you seen any of those?
Yeah, I didn't personally see any Bangladeshis on this trip. I have interviewed Bangladeshis, though, and I know about them. And I actually am so concerned about the flow of people from Bangladesh that I wrote a piece about Bangladesh and why we should be worried about folks coming in from Bangladesh, which has to do with the country conditions there and the sheer number of terrorists and extremists, Islamic extremists, that have taken up residency in the country, and Al-Qaeda and ISIS and a number of localized indigenous Islamic extremist groups. We have no idea whether the Bangladeshis that we're seeing at the border are them.
Because, again, I mean, you and I were talking about numerous cases this week of people that were brought in as refugees or other LPRs through the traditional application process that turn out to be, I mean, look at this, Todd. What the heck? I mean, these for the two Somalis from Tucson, this was a couple weeks ago, and I'm just reading from the indictment here. Muhammad told the UC undercover FBI agent that he and Abu Jihad started going to the gym so they could get stronger and behead those kuffar, right? The, infidel. Muhammad indicated that he wanted to make hijrah and asked for help from the UC. Muhammad stated that he was a lion bull killing the kuffar and beheading. I mean, dude, like, these are the guys we brought in on green cards, and it's not like, and not that this is not a problem, it's terrible, but the kind of, slick, suit terrorists with the terror finance, which is certainly a huge problem. I mean, this was like a muscle man saying, I want to behead people. I could only imagine if I put myself in Rouhani's shoes. A guy like Rouhani controls the IRGC, the Quds Force, big presence in Latin America, they are very well acquainted with our politics, that we're at a point that if you come, certainly with a kid, you're going to be released. And there's a huge pressure. If you are a border agent, and you know this, Todd, any border agent will tell you, what's in your mind? Oh my gosh, I have to stop any terrorists. I have to defend America. No, it's, dude, I'm gonna get sued. The media's gonna be on me. I gotta let these guys go. It's the migrant, not the American sovereign, not security. Let's talk about this in the prism of the ISIS guys that were potential ISIS guys caught, thankfully, by the Costa Ricans being held in Costa Rica. You told me about this 2 months ago. I wrote about it based on your article, but you're telling me this is still going on, right?
Yeah. So, just to remind your viewers, what happened was there were 2 Iraqis and 2 Egyptians that were apprehended. Actually, they were apprehended in Nicaragua after the Americans put out a BOLO, a be on the lookout for notice. DHS put that out because there was intelligence received, according to my sources, from a confidential source in Venezuela, that these guys were all ISIS, 3 of them, and then there was a 4th one as well. So the BOLO went out, the Nicaraguans caught them, and turned them over to the Costa Ricans, where theoretically the Americans in the region would go in there and conduct interviews. The reason we haven't heard anything since then, according to my sources, because I've been checking in the intelligence community, is that for some unknown reason, the Costa Ricans will not grant access to the Americans. So they're just in Costa Rican custody, and that's all anybody knows.
Don't we have DHS on the ground there, or it's just our equipment?
Yes. No, we have. Well, we're mainly in the neighboring countries. I don't think we have a station there where we have DHS CBP people, but we do have them in Panama and in Honduras and El Salvador. So it's really just a hop, skip, and a jump over to Costa Rica. We go into Costa Rica regularly. We've caught suspected terrorists on that migrant route on their way to the U.S. border in the past. Quite a few of them Somalis, and typically what happens is we'll go in there and we'll interview them and do our thing, our intelligence thing on them, and we've deported back to their home countries. We had the Panamanians deport 6 Pakistanis a couple years ago who were suspected Al-Qaeda members that were on their way to the U.S. border. These 4, for some reason, the Costa Ricans are not granting us access, and I can't figure out why, and I don't think we know why.
Wow. And folks, I want to remind you again, you will not find a better expert, both from a journalistic background and from an intel background, on the issue of Middle Easterners, extracontinental migrants coming to the Western Hemisphere, up through Central America, coming to our border. And, when this broke open, when the president mentioned Middle Easterners coming and, Africans, everyone's like, oh, it's not true, it's made up. And none of these shows would have Todd on. It's bizarre. And that's why we try to have real experts, not the phony cable TV experts who know from nothing. And I do want you guys to Google around Todd Bensman, Costa Rica, Panama. He took a trip there earlier this year, late last year in December. And actually, you could see his pictures. The pictures from there are just truly astounding. You will see camps of Middle Easterners and Africans. They are coming. It's not in the hundreds of thousands like the Hondurans and Guatemalans, but it is a lot. Todd, one of the things I was thinking of, I want to get your thoughts on this. So my understanding is the main route, so the land route starts in the Darien Gap in Panama, but they have to get to the Western Hemisphere, is that they fly into Brazil's capital. They fly into Brazil. That seems to be the main landing point for any extracontinental. And
Ecuador too, especially Ecuador.
Oh, okay, so here's the deal, and I want to try to pull this up here. And again, I can't show this on the monitor just because it's not classified, but it's not supposed to be released, this document, and I'm just going to use some of the data from it. But I have noticed, Todd, I've been watching the numbers we get from some of our mutual friends. from Texas DPS, the weekly apprehension numbers in Texas at the border. And I've noticed that the numbers are steadily climbing from two places, Brazil and Ecuador. And it's not just a trickle. So, for example, the week of July 31st, this is the last data I have, 833 Brazilians in 1 week. That's a big increase. Ecuador, 355. Those are serious numbers for 1 week just in Texas. My immediate concern was, are all of them necessarily Brazilians? Given that that's the transit point for everyone.
I honestly, I don't know the answer to that, Daniel. But I will say this, that the entire world has been watching our border in great detail, paying attention to the loopholes. They're learning about these loopholes. They're learning about the overwhelming numbers that have left huge portions of the border unguarded. They're very aware of which cities are sanctuary cities. They're very aware of the Flores settlement, which had nobody, like I think most Americans don't even know what the Flores settlement is. But believe me, the whole rest of the world knows what the Flores settlement is. And so people in Ecuador are probably taking it, wanting to say that we got to get while the getting's good. In Brazil, if you're sort of on the, things aren't going that well for you in those countries, make a break for the U.S. while you still can. And I'll tell you this, I ran into 8 Brazilians in Deming, New Mexico last month. They had been brought there by Border Patrol. There was an armory, a National Guard armory holding facility there. Couldn't communicate with them because they're speaking Portuguese, but the city officials had interviewed them, and they told me that the Mexican military held back all the Spanish speakers on their way through Mexico, but are letting through all of the non-Spanish speakers. So if you're speaking Portuguese or French in West Africa, they're letting them through. They're like, we're just going to keep the Hondurans because it's easy for us to deport them. That's a bus ride, but it's not so easy for us. We got to do a plane flight for these guys. So we're going to let the Americans handle those. So I've heard this before, that the Mexican National Guard, which is supposed to be blocking this, are taking Spanish speakers, and everybody else go on underlay.
So you're saying that even though there have been some successful policies that have stemmed some of the tide of the Central Americans, this is not stemming the tide of the extracontinental migrants and the special interest aliens. And again, some of them, they'll be metered. And, you have pictures you could see here on the screen. We have from Todd what metering means. This document with names crossed off. They take down the names, and every day they come, the CBP comes, gets a few more, interviews them, gives them over to the asylum adjudicators at USCIS. But how many are crossing? And Todd, didn't you tell me that there are some that are getting frustrated, and they said they're going to try to either pay the cartels or sneak away from the cartels and get over?
Yeah, several of them said, they told me that if they get frustrated, the Russian, for example, said if he doesn't get in, he's just going to get in the illegal way and claim asylum that way. There's really nothing. There's no law. There's no legal consequence really for them to cross illegally and claim asylum like everybody else. They just want to do it the right way initially, but they'll do it the wrong way too if push comes to shove. So.
Yep, and we have no idea who these people are. And again, it's I say this analogy all the time. I'm a big supporter of gun rights and the Second Amendment, but we all agree that even an unambiguous natural right, constitutional right, a state eventually has an interest in checking that to a certain extent. Like, you can't carry a bazooka into a courthouse. It's the same thing. Even if it's said in the Constitution, 7.9 billion people in the world can come to the border and ask and get whatever they want, which it certainly doesn't. It says the opposite, actually. If you understand our laws, the Flores settlement is the opposite of 1225 AB1, that they shall be detained. But even if it said it, if it weaponizes migration to this point that we have to let people out without any vetting, it would never, ever compel such an outcome, such a result, even if it's stated in the Constitution. Certainly the fact that It's the opposite. It's antithetical to sovereignty, to social compact, to 130 years of case law that we discuss so much on this program. And these are the national security questions that no one other than Todd really wants to examine and explore. And there's a lot more where this comes from with Todd. And he also does cover a lot of just, cases domestically with green card holders, people we let in, terrorism cases. Todd's going to be a regular guest, but I want to leave it there with the terrorism part, the national security threats. I want to move on, Todd, with the remaining time to two more questions. One is just the general overview of the border, and then the next thing is going to be just the welfare and hospitalization and the what Americans are being forced to pay for against our laws, and no one's trying to defend our laws and ask questions based on the American taxpayer. First thing, what I'm generally hearing based on the last 2 months, that between the return to Mexico policy really starting to grow legs, not just a few people, but about 25, maybe 30,000 people have been turned back. Between the imminent implementation, supposedly, of the broader asylum deal with Guatemala, say, hey, anyone who came from any country other than Guatemala, they're going to be processed in Guatemala. Several other enforcement mechanisms. It has definitely brought the numbers down. There are fewer people surrendering themselves because they know that, hey, it might no longer be a free ticket. So on the one hand, that should be good. But what I'm being told is that because there still is such a backlog of the existing ones, and there still is historically a high number surrendering, there still aren't more agents on the line. And they know this. So if you're now a migrant, you're thinking, well, it's more likely if I surrender, I'm going to be turned back. But it's still just as likely that they're tied down and the cartels could successfully get me in as a runner, as a gotaway. I'm hearing from the agents that they're seeing on the darn, what are those called? The towers and the cameras that Texas put up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the sensors, they're seeing more hits on them, more runners. From you interviewing the back end, are you seeing that more of a flow of runners?
Yeah, so here's what I'm hearing, both from my Border Patrol sources and from the migrants themselves, who I will interview in Mexico. So on my last trip, for example, I found about a dozen Hondurans who were staging for a crossing of the Rio Grande. Piedras Negras shares the river with Eagle Pass. So where I was just on the Mexican side, about 6 blocks into town, and I found about a dozen. There were 2 families, and there were a smattering of single men and women. And what they told me was, we're going over and we are going to try to evade Border Patrol. That is significant because hundreds of thousands of their countrymen and women before them actively sought out Border Patrol so that they could surrender themselves and go through the easy, free, legal release on bogus asylum claims. But because the return to Mexico policy has been working, in their minds, they didn't want to surrender themselves to the Border Patrol out of fear that there was a pretty good chance that they would just be returned again. And so what these ones were going to do is just run the gauntlet and try to get away from Border Patrol and into the interior. And they admitted it openly. And among that 12, there was even one of the migrants had been returned under the MPP policy, Migrant Protection Protocols policy. Sometimes it's called Return to Mexico. And I asked him for his documents for that, and he showed them to me, and I read them. So I know for a fact he had been returned. Well, imagine the impact of that on all of the others. Here's a guy who's sitting there sleeping on the concrete who'd been returned after he had tried it. And so they're shifting strategies. On the other hand, Border Patrol agents in the field tell me that they are finding and apprehending MPP recipients who have just turned runner. So they send them back to Mexico, and they turn right around and they just run back over. And I'm also told that there's no real legal consequence to being caught. If you're an MPP person and you get caught again, my Border Patrol agents just said that they have no direction, or that they just turn them back again, and they'll try again, and they'll just try.
Yeah, Todd, I'm hearing a lot of it's also DOJ, because it's not just DHS. It's ultimately the U.S. attorneys that have to take the prosecutions, and it's kind of like, just like Border Patrol is slammed with babysitting duty, and that creates certain consequences, they're slammed with so many of the consequences. They have to prioritize too, and they have limited resources. The Southern District of Texas has the second most cases in the entire America, just under Eastern District of New York. And it's not even that much of a difference. Eastern District of New York is the enchilada. And so, I don't necessarily blame them. I think it's more of a resource issue, but that's a problem. Then we need more resources. Then that's, rather than funding more babysitting, we need to fund more prosecutions.
So Daniel, on the one hand, we're seeing subjects of MPP turning around and running back over, okay? But on the other hand, I was in Juarez last month, also interviewing migrants who had been returned under MPP, and I interviewed a family unit that had been turned back. We are turning back some family units. I don't know what the criteria is for that, but I found them. And also quite a few single migrants who had been turned back, and they were planning to go home. They were going back to Guatemala and Honduras rather than to wait in Mexico. And I think that there are a far larger number of those than there are of the runners. And I think that overall the policy is probably working. I just read some new data that came out from CBP this morning talking about they're reporting the numbers from IOM, the International Organization for Migration, UN, which is putting buses in Mexico, filling them up with MPP people and shipping them back home. And the numbers are in the thousands where that's happening. So I think it's working more so than the other migrants that I met in Piedras Negras.
You invite them in, they come. You don't invite them in, they won't come. You'll get more runners, but then also it's half-assed, if you know what I mean here. If we would fully, once this would be fully enforced, then the agents are freed up. The agents get freed up, then they could deal with the runners, and that's really why we have a Border Patrol. And I think, so that is some good news, but again, the bad news that you mentioned is that when it comes to the extracontinental migrants, they probably are not as deterred by this because they're not being turned back, and again, not being vetted. That is a huge security problem. One more thing, Todd. All right. I am hearing that from agents that these people come, not that they're necessarily, they got injured on the way or they're dehydrated. That's certainly happening. But they have chronic illnesses, from AIDS to surgeries needed, and they are coming explicitly to our hospitals for it. And our laws, this is, straight up, you're inadmissible if you're coming for that. That's like beyond a public charge. That's a prima facie immediate, not likely to become one. You're being admitted as a public charge, yet we wave them in, and no one's asking who is paying for this.
All right, so I haven't actually been to the hospitals to interview patients, but I will say that 2 or 3 days ago I was in along the border, and I had a long face-to-face conversation with 2 Border Patrol agents who are frontline people. And what they told me is that all day, every day, they and their fellow agents are taking migrants to the local hospitals. And the local hospitals, the emergency rooms, are absolutely filled up. And they have to stay there. They know this because the Border Patrol has to be there with them during the waiting time and during the treatment and whatnot. So what they told me is that probably half to 2/3 of everyone that they apprehend, those family units, are going to the emergency room and to the hospital and are getting full treatment, from cardiovascular assessments to MRIs, X-rays, full treatment, multiple trips back to the hospital to get their full treatment. They said that I asked, well, where is this coming from? They said, well, ICE has a huge budget for this, and it all comes from federal taxpayer dollars, all of it. I think what they told me is that if the treatment occurs 48 hours after they arrive, it falls to the federal taxpayers. So within 48 hours, I think it goes to some other budget.
Okay, Todd, you're pissing me off. I mean, I can't take it anymore. I can't, because there's something that really bothers me that I didn't even realize until you said it. It's worse than it's just coming from the taxpayers. You mentioned ISIS funds. We have in this country, and this is a very modest estimate, it was DHS's Blue Book as of 2013, before the entire Central American migration, that we have 2 million criminal aliens in this country. We have 1.1 million with final deportation orders, another 1.6 million with close to final deportation orders. And guess what? We have just a couple thousand deportation officers to even scrape the surface of these people. Those people need out of here. Every day they're not deported. Sex offenses, which is just rampant among them. Murders, DUIs. I mean, this is why we have a government. If you ask the American people, should we spend X billion of dollars on security, whether it's terrorism, whether it's special interest aliens, whether it's MS-13, whether it's keeping criminal aliens out, previously deported aliens out, or should we spend it? Should we have a bill now that anyone in the world could come here for treatments that the American people have to struggle to pay for? It wouldn't even get past the committee level. Yet the unelected DHS clowns and the unelected judges are the ones doing it. We don't have a republic anymore, my friends. We do not. And nothing has changed under this administration on this front. McAleenan is such an ardent Democrat that Jay Johnson, Obama's DHS secretary, had to rebuke him for being too much of a cheerleader as an elected official, almost violating the Hatch Act. Why Trump keeps him, only Allah knows. Look, so there's some good news. Some of the stuff that we've been begging for 15 months is starting to work. But there's challenges with runners. There's challenges with special interest aliens not being vetted, and they're not being deterred as much. Man, before I blow a fuse, Todd, any final thoughts before we close up?
No, I would just, I think that we have numbers that have turned down, overall numbers that have, particularly of Northern Triangle migrants that are turned down. I think it's too early to ascribe that downturn to any one or several policies that have been implemented just because of the heat. I was just down there. It was scalding hot. That is terrible migration travel weather down there. And every year we usually have a cyclical downturn. But even with that downturn, the numbers that we're seeing are just historically astronomical. They're just absolutely elevated to historic levels, even now with this heat. I had Border Patrol agents tell me that they are still spending all day long, their entire shifts, collecting family units from Honduras and waving them through. That is still happening on a large scale, and I don't think we should forget that's still happening.
I'm glad you mentioned the heat. I'm really glad, Todd, you brought that up, because it's been a brutal summer in much of America. Here on the East Coast also, it's been the hottest summer I remember in about 15 years. There, it's been over 100 degrees when you travel to Mexico. So it's hard to know. Clearly, some are being deterred, but we probably have to wait till October to see if it really receded permanently.
October, November, that's when the truth will be told as to what's happening. So, but even if the downturn sticks like it is, it's still unacceptable. The numbers are in the tens of thousands still. Family units coming over. Some of them might get sent to Mexico under MPP. I think that's a good thing. The Mexicans are doing transportation interdiction operations, on buses, in their midsection and down in Chiapas. That's a good thing. I think that's working. They're turning them around. But boy, there's plenty of ways to get around the Mexican military. Through the Petén jungle down there. I'm hearing that they're going through there. And I interviewed 4 Mexican military personnel who are service members who are patrolling our Rio Grande. And, what they were telling me was not very heartening. They said that they personally are not allowed to grab migrants because it's not illegal to go swimming in the Rio Grande. So the northern border patrol stuff, I have no confidence in at all that it's doing much of anything.
Oh my gosh. Again, that's the thing. It's our policies. The lesson is it's what we do. Don't rely on the Mexicans or Guatemala. We need to enforce our laws. They're enforcing them a little bit. It's going down a little bit. How about we enforce it a lot? How about we have a country of by and for the American people? What is going on is immoral. I have a wife and I have 3 kids. I live just outside of the lovely city of Baltimore. If I were to say, you know what, I feel bad for downtown Baltimore and all these neighborhoods, I'm going to invite people to live in the bedrooms of my kids, and I'm going to expend all the money and resources I have on them. Am I a good person? No, I'm not. And the analogy is not even good because, let's face it, like any parent knows, you tell your kids this, it's a dictatorship at home. They are not our parents. Elected officials are the stewards of this American sovereign. If you want to represent Guatemala or Mexico, you are welcome to move there and run for office. You are American representatives, and you are here to represent us. And then look, the courts. I mean, if the Trump administration continues allowing courts to stop anything, they're on the cusp of stopping some of these policies. Not that they have the power to do so. They don't have a lever. The executive branch ultimately has to do that. They have to assert separation of powers. Unfortunately, what happens all too often is they could say Trump's not allowed to go to the bathroom, and then he'll listen because we only have one branch of government, and that is whatever the Northern District of California says. So lots of information here. We got to run. Todd, could you tell us where people could find you?
Sure. Well, I have a Twitter account, so it's Bensman Todd on Twitter. And I also have a personal website where I collect all of my writings in one place. It's toddbensman.com. And then, of course, for all of my immigration writings, you can find them there. But you can go to cis.org and look up my name, and all of my material is there. I'll be writing about my latest trip to Mexico to interview migrants. I have a piece coming out today and a couple more next week. So keep your eye on that on my website or CIS.
Well, thank you so much, Todd, for joining us. There you have it, folks. At Bensman Todd on Twitter. ToddBensman.com is the website. You really, if you're not following him, you don't know what's going on with the border. Look, this is a collaborative effort. We are here not to just opine, to start a movement. And, you could always email me at dhorowitz@blazemedia.com. If you have questions for Todd, you want me to ask him and bring up in conversation, we could discuss in subsequent shows with and without Todd. We're certainly going to have him back, as well as continue sending me your stories of suspected illegal aliens in your area that are committing crimes that aren't being reported. We are going to get that out. Have a terrific weekend. We had a great week here, very productive week. We're looking forward to another great week of First Amendment free speech. As long as we still have it, we're going to utilize it to its fullest. Thank you so much, and God bless.